I want to tell you about an experience I had 5 years ago. I was getting ready to open a big Broadway show, and as we were nearing the end of rehearsals, I started to get very worried that I was going to be extremely nervous for the opening night. And so I found myself in a meditation class that I thought might give me some tools to help me before I went out on stage. So I'm in this meditation class. I sit down on one of those little cushions, and the teacher tells us to close our eyes and turn our attention to our breath. And I do that. And then after a little while, she says, okay, now on your next inhale, I want you to say to yourself, with every breath, and on your exhale, I am closer to death. With every breath, I am closer to death. No, I don't want to do this. That's not why I came here. I've been an actor for over 20 years, and that means that I've had to come up against a lot of nerves and expectations and self-doubt. In fact, just now, while I was standing backstage in the Power Center, I sort of time traveled to the last time I was getting ready to perform on the Power Center stage. I was feeling very nervous, and my mind was racing, and my body was all wobbly, and I couldn't stop thinking about who was graduating with honors, and it was at my School of Music, Theater, and Dance graduation. And I was thinking about who was gonna get an agent, and who was gonna book the first job in NYC, and I had all of these expectations running through me from my parents, from my professors, from my peers, from myself. And right before I walked out on stage, my voice teacher, Melody Racine, came and stood next to me, and she said, just listen to your inner voice. It will tell you what to do. And I took a deep breath, and I walked out here, and somehow it worked. But let me tell you, I have been trying to contact that inner voice for the last 20 years without Melody Racine standing next to me, and it is not easy. I think that's probably why I ended up in that meditation class. I think part of why it's been so hard for me to contact my inner voice is because it's gotten drowned out by other people's voices. I've always been someone who measured themselves in relationship to other people, whether it was what they had accomplished, or how they looked, or how they seemed to be friends with all the cool kids. I've spent a big part of my life waiting for it to look like someone else's so that I could feel better about myself. And in looking for the approval and reactions from other people, it's been very hard for me to access what might be best for me. And don't get me wrong, it's very helpful to be aware of other people, but I think I've obviously built a career around it. I have this external feedback loop, but I don't just mean applause. I mean that in my life, it's very hard for me to feel good about something unless something outside of myself says that it's good. And over the years, I've started to become more exhausted and less motivated trying to imagine what other people think. It's like I'm keeping score in a game that I'm not even sure I want to play anymore. And then, in 2020, I had to stay inside for a year while our entire theatrical industry shut down. And I became aware just how much I had organized my life around this external feedback loop. I also realized that because nobody was working, I didn't feel the same envy or not enoughness that I had felt for so much of my career. But without anybody to compare myself to, I had to really think for myself. I had to try to contact that inner voice and ask some big questions. How was I gonna structure my days? How was I gonna make money? How was I going to homeschool my 5-year-old? How was I going to get through this? Most of the time, these questions were so overwhelming that I just ended up scrolling on my phone and reading articles about everything that was happening in New York City. And of course, these articles were bleak, and they usually left me scared that someone I loved might get really sick or even possibly die. But in reading all of these articles about death, I kept seeing this term, end-of-life doula, popping up over and over again. The first time I ever heard the word doula was when I was pregnant, and I found out that there were people who provided support emotionally, physically, and practically to pregnant people around the time of childbirth. And so I figured that these end-of-life doulas must provide that same support emotionally, physically, and practically, but for dying people and their families. And of course, they couldn't do their job during the pandemic because of the protocols to keep everyone safe. I immediately thought about my mother, who was dying the year after I graduated from Michigan. And I couldn't help but think about how different that experience might have been if our family had an end-of-life doula. What would it have been like if there had been someone to sit with her and help her understand what was happening to her body, to maybe help her feel less scared? What would it have been like if there had been someone to sit with me and ask me how I was feeling and maybe articulate some of my thoughts to my mom? As I read about these end-of-life doulas, I started to think about all of the different ways that people die. My mother was 3 years into her cancer diagnosis when she was given 6 months to live. But people die in accidents and traumatic events. Almost everybody I know wants to die in their people and their families. I couldn't find it. And so I started a web search and I found a training for end-of-life doulas and I signed up. With every breath, I am closer to death. On the first day of the training, we were asked to get in a comfortable position and close our eyes. And then one of the teachers asked us to imagine that we had just been given a terminal diagnosis with 3 months to live. And they took us through a meditation and said to just picture our life exactly as it was, and then to think about how it would feel to get this diagnosis. Well, sad, like really sad, and also scary. But as I sat with this idea that I only had 3 months to live, something happened. My obsession with the external world started to fall away, and the volume on my inner voice started to get turned up. It told me that my friends and my family were the most important thing in my life. It told me to think about the work, both paid and unpaid, that I had been a part of, that I felt so proud of, and the meaningful relationships that I made through that work. It told me that my nerves and self-doubt weren't something to be muscled through and managed, but maybe just noticed and acknowledged. Next, the facilitator said she was going to take us through the steps that she practiced with a person who was nearing the end of their life. First, she wanted us to think about our legacy. How did we want to be remembered? Again, I thought about my mom. She was young when she died, so her kids were young too, and I think that made it very difficult for her to face death because all she could think about was everything she was going to miss. What would it have been like if there was someone there to ask her to tell the story of her life and what she hoped would endure after she was gone? What if there had been someone to sit with her kids and help us tell our mom how safe she made us feel, or how we really appreciated eating dinner as a family every night, or how having a mom who stood up for justice and equality couldn't help but change the way that we moved through the world? Next, we were asked to think of the next step, which was if we had any regrets or unfinished business at the end of our life. Was there anyone we needed to forgive? There was. Was there any conversation that we wished we had had? There was. Over the next few weeks, I realized that the process of dying is maybe the most intimate, internal work we will ever do in our life. At the end of our life, we have to look at all of our decisions and choices and let go. And death is the only thing that is promised in this life. But the amazing thing about this is we can start that internal exploration now, while we're still alive. We can tune into our inner voice and think about how we might create a life that we can feel proud of when it's time to let go. The sociologist Martha Beck says that human culture teaches us to come to consensus, but that our nature, our own true nature, helps us come to our senses. So what does it mean to come to our senses? I think it means getting quiet enough that we can experience the cues and clues that our body is giving us. I know that's what happened when I was asked to imagine that I only had 3 months to live. And in tuning into my senses, as I was asked to do day after day in that training, I realized that contemplating my own death brought me into greater alignment with how I wanted to live. Once I accepted death as a reality, not only was I allowed to get rid of some of the shoulds and supposed tos, it felt less scary, and I finally had access to my inner voice. Every single one of us here has the ability to do that. Thanks. On the last day of the training, you guessed it, we were asked to close our eyes and focus on our breath. And if you all feel comfortable, I'm gonna ask you to do the same right now. Close your eyes and feel your body in space. And just observe your breath. Don't try to change it. Feel the coolness of the inhale, the expanse of the exhale. And now, if you can believe it, I'm gonna ask you to do what I couldn't 5 years ago. On your inhale, I want you to say to yourself, with every breath, and on your exhale, I am closer to death. With every breath, I am closer to death. With every breath, I am closer to death. Now let that go and ask yourself, what do I want from this one wild and precious life? No one has that answer except for you. And don't feel bad if it didn't come to you in this very moment. This is a practice that you can return to over and over again. You can think about your death, and it will teach you how to live. Thank you.